This is Up Close. I'm Stephen I. Weiss. We often close ourselves off from information and experiences that can help us and ignore the opportunities right under our noses. We're also ignoring the danger that might lurk in areas we've walled off from our concern. Information hidden in silos can be vital. That's the argument of Financial Times U.S. Managing Editor Gillian Tett, author of The Silo Effect, The Peril of Expertise, and the Promise of Breaking Down Barriers. And sometimes new experiences and new acquaintances can teach us how to be the people we'll become. That's a theme in the novel by New York Times Deputy Washington Editor Jonathan Weisman, number 4 Imperial Lane. But first, here's my interview with Gillian Tett about the silos surrounding us. We all know what we know, and we all think that we've got a certain amount of control over the things in our lives. When do we get that very wrong?
Well, my book's basically written to try and illustrate why there is this very subtle threat that hangs over all of us and affects society and the economy today. And it's this: we live in a world where we are hyper-connected around the world. I mean, think about your cell phone. Think about how you can call anyone around the globe at any moment, how you can get onto your cell phone, see news and information, jump on a plane, supply chains link companies, financial markets are integrated. So we have the illusion that we're hyper-connected. But in reality, we live lives that are incredibly fragmented. And often the fact we have the internet and cyberspace so readily available is making the problem worse, not better.
Right, and so many of us look back at things that went wrong, whether it's globally, whether it's regard to a local government, whether it's regard to a company or a family, and you say, how did we not realize how important this was?
Well, what got me to write this book is really asking a very simple question, which is, why are so many people who I know who are very bright doing some really, really dumb things? When you look at the corporate scandals or the government disasters or the banking crisis, it's often so easy to assume that these were done by a weird race of Martians who landed and took control, or that people somehow went mad or evil or greedy. I mean, certainly in the financial crisis, a lot of people were saying the bankers must have gone mad. And the reality is, when I spoke to the bankers, yes, there were some who were evil, greedy, maybe some who were mad, but the vast majority were actually perfectly bright people, often doing what they thought was kind of the right thing in terms of their little narrow silo. But they were working in a system that was so fragmented and so marred by tunnel vision and tribalism that nobody could join up the dots and see the terrible risks that were developing in the financial world. And that pattern played out before 2008 with the financial system. But it's not just about finance. It's something that affects many, many parts of the modern world today.
And so why is that, though? Why is that a silo problem? We all have situations that we come upon where, say, I mean, even at a personal level, if your boiler was inspected and it's got a sticker, and then something happens, and you say, but it has the sticker.
What I'm trying to explain is basically silos exist on 3 levels. You have structural silos. You have a bureaucracy divided into different departments that may not talk to each other. You have social silos, where people retreat into social and intellectual ghettos and really only talk to people like themselves, or only really look at the world through a certain pair of spectacles or lenses which feel familiar and comfortable. But you also have this idea of mental silos or extreme tunnel vision, which is that once you've classified the world according to a certain way in your mind, you're so stuck in that classification system you can't see things that lie outside it or fall between the cracks. And if you have on top of a rigid tunnel vision about how you classify the world and classify risks, you have teams of people who don't talk to each other. You have the makings of an absolutely classic perfect storm for silos that makes normally intelligent people incredibly blind.
And now, Jonathan Weisman talking about his novel of adventure and introspection. One of the things that your novel does really well is weave together these themes of nations with the theme of life and what it means to be a character going through all of this, not just being a member of a country that's going through much upheaval, but the idea that we're all going through a lot of upheaval.
We all have a past that needs to be confronted. And I talked about, obviously, some people might talk about an American empire, but not in the same sense as the British Empire or the Portuguese Empire. But I have this Jewish American character, David Heller, and he too, at the beginning of the novel, he can't look at his past. He has his own tragedy back in America, that he can't confront. And over the course of the book and learning the story of the people he's living with and their own tragedies, and thinking about how do you move forward, he learns to look back at his past and to grapple with why he won't go home.
For some other characters you have here, these former aristocrats, or I guess current aristocrats, you tell me.
I would call them former, I guess, if they're down to a few pieces of furniture.
A daughter raised perhaps too soft in a number of ways to live well in the world, and a son raised with too much incentive for adventure to live well in the world. And it makes you think about all the various ways maybe we're screwing up our children, maybe we were screwed up as children.
That is a good point, because Hans, this is a guy who had all license to do anything he wanted. You know, his father is he was in the House of Lords. He drops his title to go to the House of Commons because he has to have one last political fight to save fox hunting. And his son, his kind of man about town, ne'er-do-well son, he's got all sorts of license because he knows that the trust fund is always there, and when it's time, he'll shape himself up, come back, take over his father's peerage and his father's estate, and everything will be fine. So yes, he doesn't learn any sense of responsibility because he knows that why bother? It's going to be there for me anyway. And his sister Elizabeth, who's kind of the black sheep of the family, only because she wasn't a beautiful woman. She didn't particularly have any need to be trained in the world, and her mother sequesters her on the estate, and her only education is through tutors, and all those tutors do is teach her Shakespeare.
Then within all of that, there's this idea of time and how quickly things can change, and how you can be surprised by how little time has passed to make something what it is. But then at the same time, we're talking about some of these changes here that take centuries to make.
I tried to maintain that parallel between the individual characters and kind of the nations, the lifespan of nations. And you're right. I mean, you can say that given the circumstances, given very adverse circumstances, most people will rise to the occasion and make the changes they will.
That's all for this week's abbreviated web episode of Up Close. A reminder, you can see the full episode of Up Close on the Jewish Channel on cable, or listen to the full audio of the show as a podcast, available on iTunes and your favorite podcast player. The Jewish Channel is available on cable: Time Warner Cable Channel 1640, IOPLING Channel 505, RCN Channel 268, Cox Cable Channel 1, Bright House Channel 330, Verizon Fios Channel 900, and on Comcast on the on-demand menu on premium channels. For more information, visit tjctv.com.